Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. About 8 years ago, I purchased a house in a neighborhood with an extremely restrictive HOA. However, the property I bought predated the HOA's establishment and was not included in their jurisdiction or bound by any of their rules. My neighbor Dave seemed personally offended that I wasn't part of the HOA and didn't have to follow their excessively strict regulations. From the moment I moved in, he started giving me grief. First, it was HOA violation notices slipped under my door that I had absolutely no obligation to follow. When that failed to intimidate me, he began harassing me at every opportunity. "Hey, your grass is half an inch too tall," he'd yell across our yards. "The HOA has standards around here." "Good thing I'm not in your HOA then," I'd reply calmly, which only made his face turn redder. For months, this guy called in noise complaints anytime I had guests over. Not parties, just regular visitors. He routinely reported supposed code violations and generally made life miserable for me and my family in countless other ways. For months, he turned my life into absolute hell. Finally, one night, while friends were visiting for our weekly card game, we heard a knock at the door. It was Officer Rodriguez responding to yet another noise complaint. "Someone reported excessive noise coming from this residence," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. I gestured around my living room where 4 adults sat quietly playing cards. "Does this look like a wild party to you, officer?" "No, sir, but I still had to check it out. Have a good evening?" This was the last straw. I decided it was time to get even. I formulated a plan. You have to understand this was around 2017, and while cell phones were common, my specific plan depended on some technical knowledge most people didn't have. I've been into radio communications my entire life, so both my car and house were well equipped with two-way radios. Conveniently, my house was in a development with only one road in or out. Plus, there was a gas station on the corner that always had plenty of vehicles in the lot for me to blend in with. We put our plan into action on a Friday night. First, we established an alibi with my friend Alex, who would vouch that we were at his place playing cards all evening if asked. "You sure you want to do this, Mark?" my wife Jen asked as we prepared. "After 8 months of Dave's harassment? Absolutely," I replied. Next, I opened the windows and positioned my speakers for my sound system facing Dave's house. We then cleared a hiding space in our hallway closet with a clear view of the driveway. I got in my car and drove to the gas station parking lot, finding a spot with a clear view of all vehicles entering or leaving the development. Once we confirmed our communications were working properly, it was go time. Jen cranked up the stereo to blasting rock music that shook the neighborhood. Every light in the house went on. The music was so loud I could hear it at the gas station over half a mile away. We waited. Sure enough, about 30 minutes later, a police cruiser turned into the development. I immediately radioed Jen. "Cops incoming. Execute plan now." Working together, she and her sister Kelly quickly turned off the stereo, pulled the speakers from the windows, closed everything up, switched off all lights, and hid in the closet. The police arrived, pulled into the driveway, and found an apparently empty and dark house. Windows closed, doors locked, curtains open, lights off, driveway empty. Jen and Kelly sat silently in the closet while the officers knocked on doors, shined flashlights through windows, and walked completely around the house. "I don't see anyone home," one officer said to the other. "Place is completely dark and quiet." Eventually, they decided the house was empty and left. I watched them exit the development and head back toward town. We waited about 30 minutes and repeated the procedure. Windows open, speakers up, stereo blasting, lights on. About 15 minutes passed before the police returned. "They're back. Go dark," I radioed to Jen. Windows closed, speakers down, lights off. Once again, the police investigated my seemingly empty house. They tried every door and spent more time looking in the windows. They even sat in their patrol car out front for about 20 minutes before leaving. About 15 minutes after they disappeared toward town, we repeated the whole procedure once again. This time, it took less than 5 minutes before the police returned, this time with their blue lights flashing. "Uh-oh," I said into the radio. "They've got the lights on. Stay absolutely silent." To my surprise, the police pulled into my empty driveway but immediately backed out and drove directly to Dave's house next door. They remained there for more than 30 minutes. Jen couldn't hear everything, but there was plenty of shouting and cursing coming from Dave's place. "You can't keep calling us out here on false reports, sir," she heard one officer yell. "I'm telling you, they're just hiding. They're making a fool of you," Dave shouted back. Eventually, the police left. Jen radioed me and I returned home, both of us trying to contain our laughter as I walked through the door. 2 days later, Dave's name appeared in the local newsfeed as having been charged with misuse of police resources and filing false reports. I don't remember the exact charges. It's been 8 years now. But after that night, I never received another complaint, visit from the city, or police call as a result of Dave's actions. And all the other harassment stopped completely. Sometimes I still see him glaring at me from his yard when I'm mowing my non-HOA compliant lawn, but he doesn't dare say a word. The next one is an entitled people story. I never thought I'd be the type of person to end up in a legal battle with a neighbor, but here we are. This whole mess started about 6 months after my new neighbor moved in next door, and it turned into one of the most frustrating yet ultimately satisfying experiences of my life. Let me give you some background. My wife and I bought our house about 8 years ago, and from day one I threw myself into creating the perfect garden. I'm talking raised beds with heirloom tomatoes, herbs, a small greenhouse for starting seedlings, decorative perennials, and even a koi pond that took me an entire summer to install properly. I'd spent thousands of dollars and countless hours making our backyard an oasis. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. I'd actually started selling excess produce at the local farmer's market and had become pretty well known in our community for my garden. The previous neighbor had been this sweet elderly couple who loved watching the garden grow from their kitchen window. When they moved to be closer to their kids, I was sad to see them go, but I figured whoever moved in would at least appreciate having such nice neighbors who kept their property looking good. Enter my new neighbor. From the moment she moved in, I could tell she was going to be difficult. She immediately complained about our shared fence being too low, about my compost bin being an eyesore even though it was completely on my property and barely visible from her side, and about the bees that were attracted to my flowers. I tried to be understanding, explaining that the bees were actually beneficial and that everything was well within property lines and local regulations. Things escalated when she announced she was planning a major landscaping project. She hired this expensive landscaping company and was constantly bragging about how her yard was going to be the showcase of the neighborhood. Fine by me. I actually encouraged it, thinking maybe if she was busy with her own project, she'd stop complaining about mine. That's when the nightmare began. I came home from work one Tuesday afternoon to find a landscaping crew in my backyard. Not near the property line, not accidentally over by a foot or two, but deep in my yard, ripping out my raised beds. My greenhouse was already demolished, the koi pond was being filled with dirt, and they had torn out probably 60% of my garden. I immediately ran out and told them to stop. The crew looked confused, and their foreman came over with a property survey map, except it wasn't my property survey. It was some hand-drawn modification that showed the property line running through what was clearly my yard. When I showed him my actual property documents, his face went white. He immediately called his client, my neighbor. She came storming over, and here's where it got truly unbelievable. She insisted that she had done her research and that the property line was where her map said it was. When I showed her my official documents, she waved them off and said that those were old and that a previous owner had told her, somehow, despite her just moving in, that there had been an agreement to share the land differently. It was complete nonsense, and she knew it. The foreman apologized profusely and said they would stop work immediately, but the damage was done. Years of work, thousands of dollars in plants, my custom greenhouse, the koi pond that had taken all summer to build, all destroyed. The foreman took photos and measurements for his records, clearly worried about liability. I told my neighbor she needed to pay for all the damage. Her response was to laugh in my face and tell me to prove it. She actually said those exact words, prove it. She claimed that since the landscapers had already left and the damage was done, I had no way to prove what had been there or what it was worth. She said if I didn't like it, I could take her to small claims court, but that it would cost me more in time and hassle than I'd ever get back. That's when I decided to give her exactly what she asked for, proof. See, I'm a bit of a documentation person. I had photos of every stage of my garden's development over the years. I had receipts for every plant, every bag of soil, every piece of equipment. I had the original contractor's invoice for the koi pond installation. I had my business license for selling at the farmer's market. I had tax records showing the income I'd made from produce sales. I even had a professional appraisal I'd gotten the previous year for insurance purposes after the garden had increased our property value, but I didn't just gather documents. I followed her advice to the letter and took her to court. Not small claims court, regular civil court, because my damages exceeded the small claims limit. I hired a lawyer, got expert witnesses including a landscape architect and a horticulturist, and filed a lawsuit for the full documented value of everything destroyed, plus lost income from my farmer's market business, plus the cost of restoration. My neighbor's tune changed pretty quickly when she got served. She called me, suddenly friendly, saying we should work this out between neighbors without getting courts involved. I told her I was just doing what she suggested, proving my damages. She said she'd be willing to pay a reasonable amount, maybe $1,000 to make this go away. I declined. Her lawyer tried to get the case dismissed, arguing that she couldn't be held responsible for her contractor's mistake. My lawyer countered that she had provided false property information to the contractor and had refused to remedy the situation when informed of the error, making her liable. The judge agreed to let the case proceed. This is where the malicious compliance really kicked in. During discovery, my lawyer requested all of her communications with the landscaping company, her property documents, and her financial records to prove she could pay damages. She fought this, but the court ordered her to comply. It turned out she had never actually done any real property research. She'd just drawn her preferred property line on a map and told the landscapers that was accurate. Even better, her own messages to friends showed she suspected it might not be accurate, but decided to go ahead anyway because she figured I wouldn't do anything about it. The landscaping company, desperate to avoid being pulled deeper into the lawsuit, provided their own documentation showing that my neighbor had specifically directed them to the areas that were destroyed and had dismissed their questions about whether she'd verified the property line. They also confirmed that they'd offered to stop work the moment I appeared, but she had initially told them to continue until she arrived and saw my documents. We finally went to trial. My lawyer presented a mountain of evidence. Photographs, receipts, expert testimony about replacement costs for mature plants and custom installations, calculations of lost business income based on my tax returns and farmers market records, and documentation of the decreased property value from losing the established garden. The landscape architect testified that replacing everything to its former state would cost approximately $12,000 in materials and labor alone, not counting the lost income while the garden was being re-established. My neighbor's defense was weak. She tried to claim it was an honest mistake, but her own messages contradicted that. She tried to argue that my valuations were inflated, but my receipts and expert witnesses shut that down. She tried to claim I could just replant everything cheaply, but the experts explained that you can't just replace 8 years of established perennials, mature plants, and custom installations overnight. The judge was not impressed with her. When she tried to argue that it was unfair to hold her responsible for such a large amount over a property line dispute, the judge pointed out that she had created the dispute by providing false information and then refusing to make things right when confronted with the truth. The judge noted that if she had simply apologized and offered fair compensation immediately, we wouldn't be in court at all. The final judgment was $15,200. This included direct damages of $12,000 for restoration, $2,000 for lost income based on conservative estimates of what I would have made at the farmer's market, and $1,200 for my documented out-of-pocket expenses like the initial legal consultation and filing fees. The judge also ordered her to pay my attorney's fees since her actions had been willful and in bad faith. My neighbor tried to appeal, but her lawyer apparently talked her out of it after reviewing the case, explaining that she'd likely lose and end up paying even more in additional legal fees. She ended up paying the full judgment in installments over 6 months, as the court allowed. The best part? With the judgment money, I was able to completely restore my garden and actually make some improvements I'd been planning. I hired professionals to do most of the heavy work this time, which meant it was done faster and even better than before. My koi pond came back bigger and better, with an improved filtration system. I used the extra money to build an even nicer greenhouse with better temperature control. The really satisfying ending came about 4 months after everything was restored. My neighbor put her house up for sale. I heard through the grapevine that between the legal judgment, her legal fees, and the damage to her reputation in the neighborhood after word got around about what she'd done, she couldn't afford to stay. Her expensive landscaping project had never been completed, and her yard looked half-finished and terrible compared to my restored garden. She moved out without saying a word to us. The new neighbors who bought her house are wonderful people who actually appreciate having a serious gardener next door. They've asked for advice on their own garden, and I've been happy to help them with starter plants and tips. Looking back, I'm almost grateful my old neighbor told me to prove it. She gave me the perfect excuse to document everything thoroughly and pursue the full extent of what I was owed. If she just apologized and offered reasonable compensation right away, she probably would have gotten away with paying a fraction of what she ultimately owed. Instead, her entitlement and dismissiveness gave me all the motivation I needed to make sure she faced the full consequences of her actions. The lesson here? Be careful what you demand from people, especially when you're in the wrong. Sometimes they'll comply exactly the way you asked, and you might not like the results. The next one is a petty revenge story. I worked in an emergency room, ER, for 6 years, so I am full of stories. But when it comes to petty revenge, this one sticks out in my memory. P=patient PD =patient's daughter CP critical patient me. Every person who has worked in the ER knows that Mondays are the busiest days of the week, and also when all the crazies come out. This day was no different. I worked as a nurse in triage, where you initially get assessed in the front before going to the back. Here we determine who needs to go back first and who can wait. It's not a first come, first serve as most people think. We had a few stretchers in the front for people who needed to be monitored a little closer, or needed IVs, blood draws, labs. There were 6 stretchers, but this day was so busy all 6 stretchers were filled plus 5 more in the hallway. This lady comes in on an ambulance, but because her symptoms did not indicate an emergency, she was put in stretcher triage to wait her turn. She was in a lot of pain. After assessment, I recognized her symptoms as being caused from gallstones. Painful, but not life-threatening. We put her on a stretcher, started an IV, drew labs, and hooked her up to the monitor just in case. A few minutes later, PD comes in the front door. One look at her and we knew she would cause problems. She had everything from the shoes to the haircut, a classic rich Karen. When she saw that her mom was still in the front and hadn't seen a doctor yet, she started screaming that she knew the CEO of the hospital and that we would all be fired if we didn't get her mom back to see a doctor right now. We explained that her mom has a history or gallstones, and even P was saying that she has had this pain many times because of the gallstones. We explained about being really busy and that there were no rooms available in the back and we'll get her back as soon as we could. She eventually calmed down but was still antsy. About an hour later, another patient, CP, comes in and was put in the stretcher beside P and PD. This patient had worrying complaints, but on initial assessment we could not find anything wrong. Now, as a nurse, you learn to always trust your gut. When your gut sounds an alarm, you listen. Something about this patient was setting my alarm bells off, but all his vitals were normal, and I had no solid evidence to declare him an emergency. I hooked him up to the monitor and kept a very close eye on him. I let the charge nurse know of my concerns, and she said to let her know as soon as something changes. Not 5 minutes later, something changed. Now at this time, I should explain that this hospital was a level 1 trauma center, meaning we get all the bad cases from car crashes to gunshot victims. We were in the middle of gang territory. Since we had to be ready for any traumas, life-threatening injuries, we had a room with 3 beds that was closed off from the rest of the beds because traumas usually involved a lot of people and a lot of blood. Even on busy days like this one, those rooms were empty unless there was a trauma patient. Now, back to CP. I was taking vital signs of P when I looked over to CP. I noticed a worrying change in his rhythm and stopped with P to start assessing CP to see what was going on. That did not sit well with PD. She actually grabbed my arm and told me to finish with her mom. I jerked my arm free and said I had to make sure CP was okay. As I turned around to CP, his rhythm went into VVIB, life-threatening rhythm. I called the charge nurse to inform her of CP condition, all the while unhooking CP from the monitor and throwing his bed into drive. As I started pushing him back, PD actually jumps in front of the stretcher and stops it. She's screaming that her mom was here first and needed to be seen before CP, and screaming that I was a liar and that she was going to get me fired. I'm usually a mild-tempered person, but knowing CP was literally minutes from dying, and I said to PD, "You have a choice, get out of my way or get run over," as I started pushing the stretcher forward. Now, I'm really good at pushing stretchers fast and getting the patients where they needed to go in a hurry, one of the reasons I was part of the trauma team. PD tried to stand firm, but she saw I wasn't going to stop and jumped out of the way just as I was an inch from hitting her. Unfortunately, she did not move fast enough and I ended up running over her foot. At this point, I didn't care and got the patient back to the trauma room, leaving PD screaming lying on the floor. We spent about 30 minutes on CP, but he ended up dying. By the time I got back up front, P and PD had been taken to the back to see a doctor, but my charge nurse warned me that they were filing a complaint against me. A few days later, the actual CEO of the hospital came to visit me on my next shift. He was known to be a kind and fair man. Since this happened during a time before cameras were put in the ERs, he had to take what happened from word of mouth. Apparently, PD said I assaulted her several times and put her mom's life in danger by not assessing her properly and that I should be fired. Turned out that P did actually have gallstones and nothing else. Also, PD's foot was broken due to me running over it. I calmly explained exactly what happened and that PD's actions might have ended up in CP dying because of the delay she caused by her actions. When I got to the part of what I said to PD and running over her foot, the CEO actually started laughing and then tried to cover his mouth to hide his laughter. He explained that PD was a friend of his sister and he knows what kind of person she is. Not only did I not get fired, he put a personal note in my file praising my actions. On my next review, I got a large raise plus a bonus thanks to the CEO's note. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm going to start out by saying that English is not my first language, and I wasn't sure that this story belongs here as this is my first time posting. I used to work in media intelligence, which is a really niche market in the country that I am from. I started as an assistant and learned everything from scratch as I switched from the hospitality industry. Pretty big step, I know. I was eager to learn and was really interested in what they do as I was trying to get into media back then. First of all, as I learned everything from scratch, I got really good at what I do after just 6 months working there. I was in a 3-person team, and I had one of the best bosses and a rally good colleague, which were veterans in the industry. Both of them helped me a lot to get me where I am then. They left the company after just a year there, as upper management was just plain hot garbage. The company had 4 changes in direction within a year, and it was stressing my team out. They did ask me to leave with them, but with me being young and naive trying to prove myself, I declined. The story, after my boss and colleague left, it was just me and my team, and I was in charge of a few markets. I was asked to be on call for technical support, and was not offered anything in return. At the time, I was pissed, but also trying to prove myself, I obliged. I got really stressed out from working 13 hours a day for a few months at that point, and I kept asking my manager to hire more people as I can't be working like this, and it's stressing me out. My manager went on and on saying they don't have the budget for it, so I just forgot about it, drowning myself in work. One day, the CEO of the company came and we had dinner as he was growing close to me since I was the only one person left who actually know the in and out of the old and new system that the company used. Keep in mind, this CEO is a cheapskate and will try all and every way to suck you dry. He asked me what I wanted to change in the company during dinner, so I started with asking for 2 new hires for my team, where he gave me the same answer as my manager, so I asked him for a promotion and a raise, which was also declined, saying, "You don't have the necessary experience yet." I was pissed. As a normal person would expect, after working 13-hour days for months, you would need rest. I had almost 3 weeks of PTO saved, and I needed the rest. The manager threatened to fire me if I took any PTO, as no one was able to do what I did. I took the PTO anyways. I got well rested, and all was good until I came back. There were 2 new faces, and I was pretty confused, so I asked my manager who were they, and she told me they were my replacements. She told me my notice was 2 months, and I had to train them before I leave. She couldn't do anything, as I was the only one in the company who knew how to run the legacy and the new system, so realistically, she couldn't say that I was not training them properly, as she didn't know how things work. Here is the part where the malicious compliance happens, since the manager did not know how things work. She told me to train the interns on the legacy systems to know better on how the company was built up, and I did just that. She told me strictly to just train the interns on the legacy, and she will be dealing with the rest. Sure, I'll do just that. It was until my last week when the crap really hit the fan. My manager found out that I have been only giving training on the legacy system, and I didn't give them my notes with tips on how to run the system that needed to be used for daily operations. My manager called in the CEO and the managing director to hold a meeting with me, asking me why I hadn't trained my replacements properly. I just told them I did what my manager told me to, which the manager denied until I forwarded the CEO and MD the email that my manager has sent me, which the call promptly ending. After I left the company, I was patiently waiting for the call that was bound to come. It was my manager. She demanded me to get back to work and said that the firing was just a prank, blah, blah, blah. I told them, pay me triple my wage and I'll consider it. They called me crazy and ended the call. It's been 2 months since that call, and based on a good friend from another department, my old manager is neck deep in this crap show. The next one is an entitled people story. For context, I'm a guy in my mid-30s. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area in the house I grew up in. My parents own the house, but I live by myself and they rarely come by. They have given me a lot of freedom to make the place my own. Nonetheless, even when they have told me to use my own judgment, I always make a point of running any decisions regarding home improvement projects by them, which is why I always tell anyone coming to the house trying to sell something that I am not the homeowner. I have severe anxiety and hate unexpected visitors. I had a no soliciting sign on my front door, though I had to take it down when we replaced the door and painted the house about a month ago, and I had yet to get a new one. Though in this situation it wouldn't have mattered for reasons that will soon become apparent. For the most part, people were okay at obeying it, but I occasionally have the entitled douchebag who deliberately ignores it. Most of the time when I tell them I'm not the homeowner, they're polite, give me their business card to give to the homeowner before leaving. Last week, however, I came home, opened the garage door, and parked my car. I always back in so the front of my car is facing the driveway, and was looking at something on my phone when a young woman, probably 18 or 19, walks into my garage and comes up to my car window. It startled me, and she began her interaction with me by apologizing for startling me and said, "Don't worry, I get startled all the time. I totally understand." Okay. I ask her what she wants. She says that she's not here to sell anything, but nonetheless wants to speak to the homeowners regarding solar panels. I forget exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of wanting to get information for a brochure, and our home was pre-approved or some crap like that. If you're confused, so was I. She gives me the usual, "Are you the homeowner?" I say no. She asks if they are here, and I say no. She asks when they'll be home. I tell her they don't live here. She asks if I am a tenant, and I make the critical error of telling her that my parents are the homeowners, but they don't live here. She asks me if I can give her their contact info. I say no, but if she has a business card, I can give it to my parents, and they'll give her a call if they're interested in whatever service she's offering. She tells me she isn't offering any service, she just wants to consult with the homeowners, WTF. And again, demands that I give them their contact info. Again, I say no, but I can give them her contact info. She then launches into a tirade, saying something along the lines of, "Dude, I'm not the one who will be installing the panels. I'm not even from around here. I'm from Minnesota." I don't see how that's relevant, nor did I ever think that she'd be the one installing the panels. I ask her who she is working for, if she's with a utility company. At one point she asked if she could look at our electric meter, which she could easily do since it's right at the side of the house. And if she isn't there to sell anything, why is she here? She repeats the same confusing crap. She isn't there to sell anything, but is collecting information for a brochure about solar panels, and our house was pre-approved, and since I'm not the homeowner, could I give her their contact information? I tell her no, and that even if I gave her their information, they're just going to tell her the same thing that I'm saying, that we aren't interested. I ask if there's any way we can opt out of whatever she's there for. She says no, because there's nothing to opt out of. WTF? I try to see if she's wearing anything with her company's logo on it. All I see is a lanyard with the Google logo on it, and if I remember correctly, it didn't even have a name tag or anything. She did tell me the name of the company she supposedly was working for when she first came up to me, but I don't remember what it was, as otherwise I'd look it up. At this point, I'm beginning to feel very uncomfortable. If the genders and ages were reversed and I were a young woman sitting in my car in my own garage and a 30-something guy came up to my car and demanded my contact info, I'm sure it would be highly frowned upon. I honestly think she was mentally ill. If she were at the front door, all I'd have to do is say, "Sorry, not interested," and shut the door. But this crazy woman was in my garage, practically blocking me from getting out of my car, and I needed to find a way to make her leave. I tell her several times that I'm not going to give her my parents' contact information, but she can give me the name of whoever she works for, and I'll pass the information along to my parents. At this point, I'm more angry than anxious, and I'm fighting the urge to yell at her to get the duck out of my garage, but I remained calm. After much back and forth, I finally got her to leave. However, as she was walking out, she said, "Someone else is going to come by your house later." And the way she said it honestly sounded like a threat. So far, nobody else has come by. I since have gotten a new no soliciting sign, which I put on the front door, but I have no idea how to deal with people who come up to me when I'm nowhere near the front door and refuse to leave. In hindsight, I should have told her she was trespassing and would call the police if she refused to leave, but I was so anxious for most of the altercation that I was at a loss for words. Update. Earlier today, I came home and saw that someone left one of those signs with an advertisement on it hanging from my front door handle, next to where I put my new no soliciting sign, which I don't mind, because at least they didn't knock on the door, and even if they did, I wasn't home. I'm 95% sure it's the same company. I vaguely remember the entitled sales rep saying that the name of the company was Sonic. The reason why I'm not 100% sure is because the advertisement is about fiber optic internet and makes no mention of solar panels. So maybe because I was so agitated, I misremembered what the entitled sales rep was saying, aside from the fact that she wouldn't be doing the actual work. But everything else adds up. The advertisement says that the crews will be in the neighborhood installing their crap, and when it's complete, we will have faster, more affordable internet. The advertisement says to scan the code to get the first month free, but the code is crossed out, and instead whoever left it wrote on the other side that they are offering 2 months free, you/me. And there's the name of the person, a woman, and a number. And no, I'm not going to call them. But that's not all. I looked them up on Yelp, and there's a review from someone detailing their experience with a pushy sales rep. And it sounds almost exactly like mine. There were a lot of positive reviews. It seems like the product itself is good, and most of the negative reviews are for their sales tactics and their customer service. In any case, as I mentioned, I got a new no soliciting sign, and we, my parents and I, are probably going to have a Ring doorbell installed. In the future, I'm going to tell anyone who does this crap that I'm the homeowner and that they need to leave, and if they refuse, the cops will be called. Anyway,